So I have to watch myself. Okay, I call to order the December 3rd North Miami Planning Commission meeting for 2019. Let's go ahead and call to order, and then we'll go ahead and pledge allegiance to the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Very good. Marlene, can we go ahead and have a roll call, please?
Vice Chair Charles Ernst,
Present.
Commissioner Howard Tonkin will be tardy.
On his way, okay.
Commissioner Jason James is
He has an
excused.
excused absence.
Commissioner Bob Pashan,
Present.
Commissioner Michael McDermott,
Present.
Commissioner Milton Goodwin,
Present.
Commissioner Bernadette Pierre.
Present.
We have quorum.
Okay, very good. Since I wasn't at the last meeting, we want to go ahead and approve the minutes. Someone
Excuse me,
wants
Mr. Chair.
to. Yes.
We need to do the amendments to the agenda.
Oh,
Staff-
okay. I apologize for that. I skipped right over that, and that's one of the more important things we want to go ahead and address. One of the amendments to the agenda to get started with this evening is to select a chairman and a vice chairman for our planning commission. So I have been acting vice chairman, and I'm going to go ahead and open up the floor for anyone who would like to go ahead and nominate a chair. And
I would
also
like to
a-
nominate vice chairman to the role of chairman.
I'll
Second,
second it.
second that.
All right, the motion has been made and seconded by, motion made by Mr. Pinchon, seconded by Mr. McDermott. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Well, thank you very much. And so now we want to go ahead and select a vice chair. Do we have anyone that would like to make a nomination?
I'll nominate Mike McDermott.
Mike, do we have a second for Mike McDermott being named the
I'll
vice chair?
second it.
Okay, Bernadette Pierre has seconded the motion. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Say aye. Well, we are now a whole commission. Congratulations, Mr.
Thank you,
McDermott.
Bob.
Thank you for the years of service, and let's hope we can move forward and like we have in the past and do good for the city. All right, so let's go ahead and move to the approval of minutes.
I make a motion.
Motion to approve
Motion to
made
approve.
by Melton. Mr. Goodwin, second to Mr. Goodwin's,
I do. I
okay,
second.
Mr. Pinchon seconds it. Motion carries. I'll go ahead and sign this. There you are. Okay, to staff, is there any communications you need to address with us before we move on?
Just to let you know that we'll be bringing back to you in your January meeting, which will be a standing date that you all have, we'll be sending you the new schedule for 2020 in between now and that next date. So I know that Marlene is working on that, and we'll get that out to you as soon as possible so that you can start putting them on your calendar.
Okay, very good. And that will be, of course, the first Tuesday of every month. At one time, we had discussed, or there was some discussion as to whether or not we wanted to pencil in, I believe, a second meeting per month. I, at this point, won't really see that we need to address that. If anyone feels differently on that, I would
think
rather
staff
just go
can
ahead and
dictate
schedule
us.
the one meeting a month, and if need be, we can always call a special meeting to address anything that comes up.
Sounds
I
fair.
think we pretty much all agree on that. There's not a
Yes.
problem. Okay, good. Thank you. Continued public hearings, we have none. And so the public hearing. So we'll now go ahead and open up the public hearing. The item we're addressing tonight is PC 14-19, an ordinance of the mayor and city council of the city of North Miami, Florida, providing for a text amendment to Chapter 29 of the City of North Miami Code of Ordinance by amending Article 4, Division 2, entitled Zoning Districts, specifically at Section 4-202, entitled Types of Uses, Article 5, Division 17, entitled Storage Facilities, specifically at Section 5-1702, entitled Self-Storage Facilities, and Division 22, entitled Distance Limitations for Certain Uses specifically at Sections 5-22-2201 and 5-2202. And a new section, 5-2205, entitled Location and Distance Restrictions for Self-Storage Facilities, to establish locational standards providing for repeal, conflict, severability, correction of Scrivener's errors, codification, and for an effective date. May we have staff report?
Yes, sir. Good evening and welcome to our new chair and our new vice chair. And so let's get going. What you have before you is amendment to 2 articles in our code. And as you'll see, it's in Articles 4 and 5. Those are, Article 4 is our use section, and Article 5 is our development standards sections. So what this does is our staff report lays out the specific criteria, answers the specific criteria in the code. When you put forth a text amendment, there are a number of questions that have to be answered. So between those questions and our staff report, we've laid out the rationale for establishing certain locational criteria. We looked, what you see on the screen before you is, in the background, you'll see a map of the existing storage facilities in the city, and they have little rings around them of different radii, 500 and 1,000 feet radii, as we were starting to test the code, because you never want to put something in place unless you fully test it. So we started by looking at where they were located, and whether they were truly storage facilities or whether they were warehouses. And some of them are named storage, but they're actually warehouses. And so you can see we took some photographs of each of the locations for just give you an idea of where they are. They are primarily located on the eastern side of the city currently. We do have another one that was permitted in January of 2018, and that is actually the former, the former Essex Pool, I believe it was, and it's located 151st and 18th. It's just undergoing into building permits now. So, but these are the ones that are actually out of the ground existing. And so what we looked at was what would be, we've had a number of concerns expressed by those in the community as well as council members, concerns about self-storage facilities here in the city, how many we have, is that a good thing? And so we were asked to go back and revisit this section of the code and determine what would be appropriate, what kind of locational criteria, if any, and what could be a potential way of better facilitating the appropriate locations. And so we started by looking at various radii, 500, 1,000, and then we had done this earlier at 2,500. And we looked also at what was described by, during a council conversation on this topic as prime lands. And so we looked at what we consider prime lands, and that is in our planned corridor development district, along our major corridors are, because they're allowed in only in certain zoning districts. But some of those zoning districts in which they are allowed fall on our major corridors. And so we wanted to take a look at how to better facilitate appropriate locations for them to be, not on what is considered to be prime lands. And again, those are along our planned corridor development districts, and then specifically along the corridors you see listed here: Biscayne, 123rd, 125th, Northeast 6, Northwest 119th, and the entirety of 135th. So we also then took a look at an additional criteria that has nothing to do with necessarily a location, as much as it has to do with this minimum lot size of 1 acre. So they would have to be, we did not want to completely say you can't come here at all. But we did want to make it very specific as to where we believe as a community. So this is the starting point conversation, as you all know. So we are going to, let me finish up where we are. We are tentatively scheduling this for first reading in January 14th and second reading on January 28th. And assuming that it retains that schedule, because as you all know, we don't control city council's schedule, it's controlled by the city manager. Ultimately, where that appears on those agendas, but they would become effective 10 days after that. And with that, that's the end of staff's presentation.
Okay, very good. Thank you, staff. I know there are some, in discussion with staff, that there is an existing developer who has had plans to put a storage facility in over on Memorial Highway and 135th Street, which the city council rejected. Bear in mind that I believe that they are still going to come back to that, and it's my understanding that they would be grandfathered in, and so that structure would not be affected by anything that we would come up with. So anything after that, I believe, we would be subject to this. Is that correct, staff?
Go ahead. You were going to say something?
I was listening carefully to make
Go
sure I
ahead.
agreed with it.
Okay. Yes, Mr. Chair, just a slight clarification. What would happen is they would do an appeal. And because this was a council decision, they appeal directly to circuit court. So ultimately, they would go through that process. But by the time, and because there's already an application, there's already a situation, there's the potential that even if they came back, this would not be applicable to them. So I just wanted to make sure everybody understood that.
I have a couple of questions, I guess, because it seems as though with this this specific one, it's in my District 3, and I know that there's so many different views, I guess, on storage facilities, on dollar stores, on all these different things that we seem to be attracting as a city. And now staff is doing a great job trying to see how we can make people happy, limit. I guess one of my questions is that I'm neither. Do we know the current storage facilities that we have that you researched? Do we know what their occupancy rates are, and are they actually? Because as you said, you found out some of them actually aren't storage facilities; they're warehouses. So I'm just curious of like I have a storage unit on right down the street, and it just seems like no one's ever there, except for me. So I'm just curious if they're actually doing enough business to warrant coming here, and if they are, then maybe we don't want to put so much limitations on them.
As to your As to your question regarding occupancy, we do not have that level of data. I believe Mr. Chair, Mr. Tonkin. But that's certainly why we're here today, as to whether or not we wish to make those recommendations. We were asked to draft this, to look at it. And that's the reason we're here today, is to have this conversation as
Well-
to what you all would recommend to move forward to city council.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, if I might.
Yes, go ahead, Mike.
Yeah. Well, I think, first off, I think that a lot of these storage facilities are just simply landholders. They establish these storage facilities to simply hold a piece of property. It's very cheap to construct, very easy to maintain, and simply administrating them is much more simplistic than running, for instance, an apartment building. And they wait for the increase in land value, and that's been a tactic that some of those developers have used, that use storage. They just become property holders. They just become, and the profits are usually pretty good. But every study that we've seen, and I know in some of the, Debbie, that one group that we had, it was last year or so, it appears that things like self-storage facilities and 99-cent stores, et cetera, are really a detriment to bringing real development into a city. It just sends the wrong message. And all the experts, or all the people who study these things, I should say, pretty much all agree that, that these are not things you want to have on your main corridors that are determined to be the corridors of development, because it really is a detriment to real development coming in. And I think all the studies have shown that. In some cities, here in Dayton-Broward County, have either isolated them to the industrial districts per se, or have certainly kept them off or zoned them off their main corridors for development. So, that's what we've seen to date anyway. But I know that one group that came, what was it, last year, 2 years ago, remember? Over at the, anyway, but most of the major studies have shown that these are not things that you want on your major developmental corridors anyway. It seems to not, it deters development from coming, because it speaks to where the situation is the city is as far as disposable income and that kind of thing.
Okay, if I may just quickly,
One other thing. Does staff have any recommendations as to where you would want them zoned?
That's what's in the ordinance. And,
Yeah.
it is in the ordinance.
Yeah, it is in the
And
ordinance, okay.
so, those are the locations that we define as prime lands based upon council discussion as to, we should not have them fronting along our prime land, and which is really the PCDs, Planned Corridor Development, and the major corridors.
Which, by the way, now, we have set guidelines within those areas for, to be development specific, correct? Where we want mixed-use development, retail, business, and not have a proliferation of just one type of business. I mean, that was the whole idea of how we came up with wanting to have these areas zoned off. Before we move on, I failed to look, in fact, since we didn't have an audience, I didn't open up a public hearing. So for the record, Madam Secretary, I want to go ahead and just make a note that we have no one here to speak on this item. So we'll go ahead and open and close the public hearing section of the meeting. And we'll go ahead and proceed with comments from the commission. And so I'll go ahead and, Mr. Panchon, you have the floor.
Yeah, thank you. I think we just heard some assumptions made about landholders and all the studies done by the developers that say this is no good. I consider this capricious zoning. One week, somebody doesn't like drive-through windows at restaurants, so we start denying perfunctory access to that. Next week, somebody's not happy with self-storage, so we're gonna gerrymander them completely out of business. What's next? I mean, who do we pick on that somebody doesn't like? The definition of C1 districts, the purpose of a C1 commercial district, according to the comp plan, is to provide the citizens of the city with convenient access to goods and services without adversely impacting the integrity of the residential neighborhoods. There's already restrictions on self-storage facilities. None in Chinatown. You cannot front the major C1 corridors, which are Dixie Highway, Northwest 7th Avenue, Chinatown, and Northwest 119th Street. Now, on one hand, we don't want them clustered together, so that's the distance thing. But at the same time, we expand the restricted areas that they can build. So we don't want you all in these districts, but we're gonna eliminate the districts you can move to. We say we don't like them because they're detrimental to our neighborhoods, and now we're gonna require that all of them be at least twice as large. Currently, they cannot abut a single-family district. Now we're gonna move them back 500 feet. So if you don't let them front the PCDs and they move off the PCD, they're gonna be right inside the 500-foot trap of the residential neighborhood, so they can't go there either. So we've created an ordinance that says you can't go any place in the city. There's just not a piece of land left for you to be able to develop.
They are certainly can go in the M1, and that's where they're currently allowed, and they certainly can go in the M1. This doesn't affect if you're in the M1, as you could see.
The idea
that-
wasn't for M1s. I know, just like this gentleman, I know about 8 or 9 people that use self-storage facilities. And they are residents who use the storage for the overflow that they don't want to keep in
their
their
garage,
residence.
yeah.
Whether it's an apartment that's 500 square feet, now that we've reduced the sizes of those, that I need a place to put stuff, or it's a guy that's got a house and he's got seasonal stuff that he wants to put, like Christmas decorations or whatever else. Those are all the people I know, and guess what? All of those people they want to be near their residential neighborhood
Right.
to get their stuff. So somebody doesn't like self-storage, and now we're gonna back into an ordinance that prevents them from existing unless you go to an industrial district, which
Makes it inconvenient.
flies in the face of what self-storage is really designed to do. That's all I've got to say for the
Yeah,
moment.
I
Right.
have to agree with you, Bob, because again, I do use the self-storage, and the one that we have now, the issue in the city, which, you know, again, that client was, or that project, they were just doing as of right what they bought the land for, and now it's created an issue, and which seems, that's why we're hearing this now, but I'm close to that project, as I said, and I'm actually was kind of looking forward to being able to just go right down the street, whereas now I have to go probably 2.5 miles to get to my unit. So I'm kind of, I agree with you, Bob. It's like we're not really giving everyone the same kind of opportunity. And,
Well, the things that we do allow in the district are nursing homes, car washes, auto parts stores, auto showrooms, car service centers, kennels, cosmetic surgery centers, tool rental, distribution centers, warehouses, and call centers. Those don't seem to bother anybody.
And they're all,
Somebody's got a wild hair about storage.
Mr. Falcon?
Tom? Howard?
First of all, just sorry to everyone for being late. What he said exactly, but also a couple of other things. I think we should be, you know, if you want to make sort of arbitrary rules, it should be adding to rather than taking away things. So for example, storage facilities could have green walls to make them attractive, but you know, it's also sort of bristle at the idea about taking people's rights away about what they can do with their land, and I think it's kind of putting the horse before the cart. So we want to be a city that doesn't have all storage facilities everywhere and mechanics and dollar stores. Then we have to get the blight out of our city, and we have to gentrify the city with tree planting and clean up the litter and get the traffic and fund the police enough so that we have a nice city to live in. Then we want storage facilities everywhere. But telling people what their rights are is sort of the backwards way to do it. So it really is sort of like civic responsibility and the city's responsibility partnering together, so we're not going to be the city of storage facilities. The other thing is also that through the next 50 years, we face some very serious challenges of sustaining a vibrant and livable city. And storage facilities are going to play a major role in that transformation through climate change. So we're going to start losing percentages of our housing inventory, and those people are going to need places to store their stuff and be moved to other places in our city. And then on top of that, if you allow where you can have storage facilities, then you may be squandering very precious highland that you want to have residential people living on specifically, and also commerce and, you know, businesses and stuff. That's all.
Thank you, Mr. Duncan. Ms. Pierre?
Well, when it comes to me, I'm just going to have to agree with Mike McDermott, because I think that having all the storage in the city, especially in the front, it's not a good look, and it's definitely not a good, I mean, driving around and just to see this box of things sitting there, it's just a storage area to where those front store can be occupied by major, you know, better businesses. For me, I just don't see it. I mean, you don't walk into a major city, like you don't walk into Coral Gables and all the cities and see these things popping like that. It just don't work.
Yeah, I don't think, Bob, anybody's trying to outzone them. It's just that I think that on the major corridors, 125th Street, 135th Street, you know, et cetera, 6th Avenue, I think that, you know, your prime real estate that you're looking to get new development in, I think from everything that I've read and the things that I see happening in other cities, these are the areas that, you know, people view as not being ideal for that kind of development, and possibly hindering other kinds of development from moving in. No one's saying that we're going to try, and certainly, for instance, I don't think we should have oil change stations on 125th Street. That's a personal opinion, but and only personal. But you know, I do read the APA stuff, and I do work in other cities and see what they're doing. So I just think that, you know, having them on facing the major corridors in a city that's struggling to bring development and to redevelop, I think is, you know, what the thought is.
Beautiful green walls.
Well, I think what we're looking at right now, staff, is, from what I can read, I tend to go along with the city's concern about first of all, wanting to create an atmosphere for new development, a variety of development, and I think the guidelines that they put in there are fair, and I agree that I would want to use a storage facility. Being a businessman, I have to use facilities, and also, you know, look, it's kind of a catch-22, but I think what staff has attempted to do is at least put a guideline in to where let's look at the overall picture and say, the city wants to attract a different type of development other than storage facilities, other than Family Dollar stores, and this is the first attempt, and you know, I would go along with the staff's recommendation to set up the limits as they have expressed in this. So
Can I I make a motion to approve?
Yes, go ahead.
I'd
Mr.
like to
Chair,
make the new yes.
One more comment? I'm
we have
sorry.
a couple of minor amendments before you actually vote on.
Okay.
All right, go ahead.
Okay.
Okay,
So,
So on, I don't have the page number. On Division 22, distance limitations for certain uses, where it includes under 5-2202 definitions, the last sentence reads, "No wholesale or retail sales are permitted." That's sometimes a part of the self-storage operation, that they sell
Right.
boxes and tapes and things like that. So
Mhm.
I don't think the intent was to prohibit that. After discussing with staff, I think the intent was to prohibit sales from the storage units themselves. So
Okay.
I would recommend adding, after are permitted, the words "from storage units."
Okay.
all right,
This
do
is
we-
actually an existing definition that we have in Article 7, so we would then come back and make that modification by also modifying another section of the code, which we can't, we'd have to re-advertise this for the next round. So we can make that between now and then, because the title would change, because we'd have to amend Article 7 as well.
So what we would accept tonight, we would accept with the amendment as stated this evening, correct?
That's correct,
And that'll be as a part of what we send forward.
sir.
All right, and
Right.
then what will come back will
Then
be
take
what
that
now?
So the
They don't
other
they don't
change
allow that anyway.
relates to subsection F, which is not laid out, but there's already a minimum lot size. Subsection F relates to storage
C2B.
facilities within the C2BE zoning district. And we just need to reconcile how F and G relate to each other. We can say additional criteria applicable to storage facilities outside of zoning district C2BE, or how do you want to handle that?
The intent would be to say, except as otherwise more specifically provided in these LDRs. The thing is that this is going to apply to C2BE as well. So what we'll do is we'll go in and look at the C2BE and see if we need to link that, better. Because this would apply to where it is now, and that's a very limited area. That C2BE is a very limited, and it's already cut down by those criteria. It shrinks where they can be located down to a very minutia in C2BE. And it's really only one specific parcel that meets that criteria. So that wasn't as big of an issue, but we need to make that internal correction. Yeah, so we want to make sure that we fix that between now and city council.
So
And
there
we
there
ask
may
for
be some
that.
adjustment to language. Staff will go ahead and look at between now and city council meeting, clarifying the overlap,
So the
All right.
motion would be
to
to,
allow staff to make some minor modifications
so
to
to
reconcile the
approve
districts.
to approve staff's recommendation as
With the amendments,
with the amendments.
Right.
all right?
Okay.
Do we have a second to that?
I'll second that.
Okay, there's been a motion to approve staff's recommendations and amendments, seconded by Ms. Pierre. All in favor, say aye. Aye. All opposed?
No.
No.
I hear two noes. Do we have another no?
I'm still on the fence about it. I said, I
Well,
voted in for of it.
There's no-
There's no abstaining.
Yeah, there is no fence,
I'm just,
so,
I say aye.
okay, aye, so the motion does carry 4-3, correct? Mr., for the record? 4-2, 4-2, I'm sorry, 4-2. I'll do better at math, okay. Motion to accept the amendment is approved, 4-2. And so that item has been addressed. We have no other items on the agenda.
We,
Um,
sir,
Yes,
we should note
Goes to city
for
council, and
the
they only
record,
read what we-
opening the
it's a
public
joke.
hearing, and that nobody's in the audience to make.
I
it.
did.
You did
Yes,
that?
I did make,
I know they opened it at the beginning, did they?
yeah, I didn't,
Okay.
yeah, I stopped the proceedings and made a note for
Okay, thank you.
staff to recognize that. Thank you, Mr. Hill.
I just-
Okay, all right. Do we have any committee reports, any old business that we need to address?
No, sir.
Okay. New business would be to set up a calendar, I believe, for 2020.
And the next meeting date is January 7th,
There you go. Thank you.
7 o'clock PM.
Give me that date again, I'm sorry.
January 7th.
January
2020.
7th? All right. And Ms. Love, am I understanding you will have a calendar set by then for the year, or do you have one tonight, or will one be available soon or
Yes,
there?
we'll certainly be putting, Marlene will be putting the final touches on that,
All
and
right.
we'll send that out to you all
Okay.
shortly
And that will reflect one meeting a month,
at
as
this time
discussed.
for your direction.
Right.
Time that we spent
Okay, great.
on the nonprofit.
Seeing no other items to address, no further
Maybe-
comments,
maybe
I
we'll
call
send
for
our
adjournment.
recommendations.
Meeting is adjourned.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.